Stranger Things is, for the most part, a pretty apolitical show, in so much that it doesn't often reflect upon its period or setting to make any substantial commentary on 80s culture and media. You know, it doesn't share much of a mission statement with something like This Is England or It's a Sin, although Eleven is rocking that skinhead mod look for a good portion of the show. Stranger Things is a work that, for all intents and purposes, channels 80s media and aesthetics for pure escapism. It doesn't ask its audience to look back on that time and think, how did we get here?
Oh my god, can we talk about the political and economic state of the world right now?
And I think that sense of escapism is something that also applies to the creators. When the Super Duffer Bros reference 80s media like E.T., it's not using that material to make any sort of, we're now in 2016 and isn't it interesting how this sort of media has or hasn't changed type commentary. To me, it reads more like, oh, we watch these things as children and now we're in a position where we can give them a loving homage. Black Mirror's San Junipero approached its trip back to the 80s in a similar way, but purposefully amped up its rose-tinted glasses of that time period to make a point that this is someone's memory, an idea of what the 80s was without all of the unpleasant, nasty shit that also went on. The whole concept is formed around the idea that this place is an escape from reality, focused on iconography, colour and music from the period. San Junipero's simulated reality is pretty much Stranger Things. Grease is also worth noting here, as the producers took a stage production that reflected upon 50s culture through a satirical and at times pretty edgy lens. I'm talking gang violence, sex, knives, and it turned it into a family-friendly high school drama with a flying car. Mike Kubek does a great retrospective on 50s culture, the Grease stage show, and its eventual adaptation. I would highly recommend checking it out. And that's not to say this is bad or that these things are bad and that you should feel bad. I love Stranger Things, it's a really fun show and one of my favourite comfort watches when I feel bad. But it's not true to say that Stranger Things doesn't have any political commentary. Outside of the more overt lip service that predominantly seems to reside in season 3, I think there is still a lot to unpack and talk about, even if what I'm unpacking was unintentional. When your story is set in the past, there are always going to be some political elements that bleed through as a result of its very existence. Despite season 4 being superficially the darkest chapter of Stranger Things in a Harry Potter mature with the characters sort of way by bumping E.T. for Freddy Krueger, I maintain that season 1 is the closest the show gets to making an interesting observation and critique of 80s culture. I would actually argue that Hopper in season 1 just continuously punching people as a way to get around different obstacles is a pretty funny lampoon on cool violent cop 80s media, but then in future seasons, it isn't. And this strange inconsistency with the show is what interests me. So I refuse to unpack my thoughts. Here they are, you fuckers. To state the obvious, season 1 revolves around the disappearance and abduction of Will Byers, and the briefest of glances at public safety ads from the time and contemporary true crime documentaries paints an image of just how much the whole stranger danger, abduction, missing child panic was baked into the zeitgeist of 80s culture.
Charlie's reminded me, my mum says I shouldn't go off with people I don't know.
Last year, 50,000 children disappeared. Many of them from nice, safe neighborhoods.
It's important to highlight that Reaganomics has a role to play in contextualizing Will's disappearance. He just so happens to be from a single mother household, his older brother working a job after school to help pay the bills, meaning Will was home alone during the time of his abduction, something that could have potentially been avoided if he was from a more affluent background like his peers. But Will's family is on the margins, both economically and socially. Will is often on the receiving end of homophobic bullying, even when he's not around, and therefore find themselves at a higher risk of being preyed upon by, in this case, a big, toothy demi-gorgonite, shoehorned small soldiers reference for you there. As Daniel Reynolds puts quite eloquently in their article for Advocate, Byers is branded queer due to his quietness and his class. Joyce is viewed, even by Hopper, as this crazy crazy and hysterical single mother going through some sort of psychological break. Because of who she is, her plight and worries are not taken entirely seriously.
You think I'm making this up?
I'm not saying that you're making it up. All I'm saying is it's an emotional time for you.
Joyce? You got one step from falling off the edge. She's been a few steps for a while now, hasn't she?
There's this unspoken assumption that because of her class and familial situation, she can't just be a mother in grief, rather some societal misfit who has already fallen off the edge before her son went missing, and at worst, responsible for her own victimization.
Oh, brother, I have not needed you for a long time!
Oh no? Look what happened.
Communication and lack thereof is a big factor that plays into the alienation of Joyce's family. She can't afford a new landline in order to locate her son and remain in contact with the wider world. The family even create their own form of communication that others don't understand. Joyce uses Christmas lights to interact with Will, and the earlier setup of Jonathan and Will bonding over the Clash and David Bowie that Will then uses to make contact from the Upside Down is a great way of incorporating 80s media into the plot and resonates thematically. Countercultural music is a figurative tool of liberation and identity formation for teenager Jonathan, as it offers an alternative to the pervasive normalcy that he warns Will against adopting. Despite being perceived as dysfunctional and pitiable by others, the Byers family are actually depicted as having one of the healthiest family dynamics in the entire show, especially when you compare them to Mike's traditional, all-American, Reagan-supporting household.
We have to trust them, okay? This is our government. They're on our side.
Mike and Nancy have similar issues of communication to the Byers, but in their case, the difficulty seems to stem from an inability to simply talk to their parents, whose marriage, according to Nancy, was one born of convenience. Anytime the family are together, it's just shrouded in a tense atmosphere, often resulting in some sort of confrontation. The acceptable, traditional family is totally miserable, a critique that feels even more pointed when you consider how fucking sweet Dustin and his mother are together. It's pretty clear throughout the series that Nancy's mum is pretty unhappy and recognises their family dynamic is strained, but it's not until season 3, which we will get to, that she truly reveals how constraining that traditional setup is on her own happiness.
This world, it beats you up again and again until eventually most people, they just stop trying.
Now, this is just me having some fun, but the Upside Down could be viewed as a rejection of the more glamorized elements of 80s culture, a darker, violent, and more predatory underbelly that constantly threatens throughout the entire series to bleed through and penetrate an otherwise safe and romanticized period of history that's often presented to the audience through the lens of nostalgic media and aesthetics. The Upside Down is, after all, the catalyst for the entire story, and directly responsible for exposing the aforementioned societal prejudices. When Bob gets murder gunked, the fallout shows the police are more interested in Nancy's sex life.
Maybe she was jealous because she saw you go up to Steve's room?
We're just friends. We just talked.
Now, was this before or after you changed out of your clothes?
A young girl's disappearance is brushed off as the result of promiscuous teenage antics. Barb is seen as someone who was probably just getting herself into trouble. It really interests me that the disappearance of both Will and Barb is mostly met with acceptance by law enforcement. It's almost viewed as an inevitability because of who they are and where they fit within the societal structure of things. I honestly think that the first season of Stranger Things could have happily existed as a self-contained miniseries. It wrapped itself up and didn't necessarily demand further elaboration. Joyce is vindicated when Will is rescued from the Upside Down, and she ends up bonding with Hopper, who finally seems ready to move on from his own traumatic past. Jonathan and Nancy are able to express themselves to one another in a way they haven't previously been able to with anyone else, and learn some nice lessons from one another despite their different backgrounds. And the kids, I think that's a little more vague, but they learn to be braver and stand up for themselves or whatever. Perfectly fine little narrative. And although I am glad the later seasons exist, as I love a lot of what they do, from this point on, things start to get a little wonky.
I mean, I had a few issues.
Issues?
I just felt it was a little derivative in parts.
Oh, bruh.
Season 2 of Stranger Things is, in my opinion, the biggest dud of the entire show. It embodies the classic tropes of an 80s sequel by doing roughly the exact same story again, but upping the ante with more action and explosions and monsters. There's a lot of them now. We get a repeat of Hopper questioning Joyce when it comes to Will, encouraging her to ignore the warning signs of something worse on the horizon, and to accept his visions and strange behaviour as PTSD. Even though this is tied to Hopper's own experience with PTSD, it's not super engaging to see the beats of this idea play out in the exact same way as they did in season 1, and I feel like it kind of betrays the understanding and respect Hopper and Joyce found for one another by the end of the previous season. Nancy and Jonathan partner up again, and it doesn't feel like a great amount has changed in their relationship since the last time we checked in. Nancy is still with Steve, she's still unhappy being with Steve, although this is now more to do with her own issues than with Steve just being a big nasty arsehole, and her eventual kiss with Jonathan feels like it crossed very similar terrain to that of season 1 in order to get us here, something they explicitly acknowledge.
What?
Nothing. Just déjà vu.
We even get a similar premise of introducing a girl to the friendship circle who is not welcomed by one of the members, and although it kinda makes sense as to why Mike would have an issue with moving on and embracing this change, he does it in a way that is used to mostly reflect upon why season 1 was so enjoyable. And it doesn't do any of this to reflect upon the repetitive nature of sequels. It starts to become a bit of a self-eating snake, like Stranger Things is nostalgic for its own prior season. I find it especially funny that they use the 1984 presidential election as a backdrop to this season. Kind of cements this idea of continuity and lack of change. Season 2 is also when the show starts to hint at the Upside Down becoming some sort of Cold War arms race parallel, which is fully realised in season 3. I don't have a lot to say about this, I'm not a massive fan. It's very reminiscent of the whole let's use dinosaurs as weapons for the military or whatever present in the first 2 Jurassic World films. Like, forget nuclear warheads, let's use these weird alien dog things that are probably overall less dangerous than most bears. It's obviously subjective, but in my opinion, it just feels like an uninspired way to utilise a concept as cool and interesting as the Upside Down. We also get some heavy hints that Billy is a racist. He gives Lucas the evils multiple times throughout this season, and his dialogue is just coded as fuck.
I'm older than you, and something you learn is that there's certain type of people in this world that you stay away from. And that kid, Max, that kid is one of them.
This doesn't really build to any substantial payoff though. Like, yeah, he is physical with Lucas in episode 8, but I don't know why they hinted so hard at it being related to race when you could pretty much substitute any of the kids for Lucas here. According to Dacre Montgomery, who plays Billy, the script originally contained a far worse piece of language to be used against Lucas. Season 1 also lightly touches on Lucas being the victim of racism, where he's called Midnight as a way to, I assume, avoid using a racial slur, and I totally understand why you would opt to do this in fucking Stranger Things, but they touch upon the topic so lightly in these first 2 seasons, I question why they even bothered. There's just something so non-committal and confusing about the whole through line with Billy. It feels like the writers were maybe uncomfortable depicting this sort of thing themselves, but also felt like they had to, in some way, acknowledge the fact that racism existed in the 1980s. This isn't strictly related to the main topic of the video, but I think the best progression from season 1 was seeing Hopper and Eleven living together, and how Hopper's past experience with his own daughter has made him overprotective and fly off the handle when Eleven pushes to leave the cabin. The Lost Boys-esque gang in Chicago with the lost sister felt a little jarring. Although it was important to Eleven's journey, it reminded me of that one episode of The Office where they tested out a potential Dwight Schrute spin-off show. This felt like a pilot for a totally different series. I also think it was an odd decision to have Hopper unaware of the fact that Eleven was even missing from the cabin. He learns to be less controlling and domineering without going through the anxiety of knowing Eleven is out there in the world by herself. Like, the story still works, but I just feel like Hopper finding out about her adventure in the car after the fact is an odd choice, because it means the revelation has little effects on him. His apology scene would hit a lot harder for me and feel even more genuine if he knew that Eleven wasn't in the cabin at the time, time because of how he doubled down on his controlling behaviour after she had visited Mike's school. Stranger Things Season 2, in my opinion, has very little meat on the bone. I'm always tempted to give this season a miss anytime I rewatch the show.
Чтобы вытянуть из тебя деньги в карман богача. Это дорогой друг, yes, America.
Season 3 of Stranger Things is really when the show properly became a franchise, the most popular piece of media on Netflix at the time, and its existence as a brand was on show here in full, unashamed glory. Starcourt Mall feels like the perfect evolution for Stranger Things, an upgrade from the quaint arcade. Its presence and ruinous effects on the independent high streets of Hawkins go hand in hand with the season's heightened stakes and danger. The mall is entangled within a story of corruption and greed. Its very existence gives cover to the continued threat of the Upside Down, and their very literal connection shows how these two worlds run parallel to one another. The setting of Starcourt also allows for a much more dramatic exploitation of mainstream 80s iconography. It gives the show a great excuse to really indulge itself in a colourful amalgamation of brands and clothing and products that are ultimately destroyed by this giant Play-Doh monster before the whole thing gets burnt to the ground. And that imagery feels like it should be making some sort of concluding statement that affirms the conversation it's been having with us about greed and monopolization, but it doesn't, which is a shame considering it did invite us to think about those things. The majority of Season 3's story is contextualized by the Cold War, which feels like a conflation of two conversations. Anytime a character levels a fair criticism against capitalism, it is immediately blunted by the presence of these evil Russian communists. Despite showing and telling us mall bad, what Starcourt has come to represent is still ultimately favoured. Case in point, the only likeable Russian in the whole season is the one who embraces capitalism, informing Murray the system isn't rigged after all, and is then instantly murdered by his nasty Russian co-worker for doing so, which is admittedly very funny.
Предатель.
I don't think this is intentional. There's probably an element of the writers just wanting to highlight how charged and divisive these opposing ideologies were, but like the minimal commitment to Billy and Lucas in Series 2, it feels like a rather unfortunate side effect of bringing these ideas up and then not fully committing to any sort of thoughtful reflection. Also, Erica's capitalism versus communism soapbox would be funnier to me if I didn't feel like the Brother Duffys agreed with everything she was saying. The aforementioned issues contextualize her as some sort of no-nonsense girl boss entrepreneur.
You know what I love most about this country? Capitalism. It means this is a free market system, which means people get paid for their services depending on how valuable their contributions are. My ability to fit into that little bit is very, very valuable to you all.
But Erica is actually proving the opposite here by holding a monopoly on the small children who fit into events markets. The market is rigged, there is no competition. I say nationalize the small children who fit into events market.
They're commies. You don't pay people, they cut corners.
Erica has clearly never travelled via Avanti West Coach. Now, fun nitpicking aside, my biggest issue with the commentary on dying high streets and the rise of greed and corruption is that Season 3 of Stranger Things pretty much becomes a mall itself. According to Netflix, there is no paid product placement in Stranger Things, but product visibility and marketing tie-ins are still part of the same monster. According to the American Marketing Association, Stranger Things Season 3 generated an estimated value of $15 million with over 100 recognizable brands. And listen, I don't care about Netflix making extra money from Stranger Things. This is how the media business works, who gives a shit? Burger King exists, Coke exists, whatever. My gripe is focused on the void of commentary and substance at play. For example, Mad Men was a show actively criticizing the culture of marketing and advertising, but would still occasionally make a nice bit of cheddar from the brands featured in their show. Although, according to showrunner Matthew Weiner, this didn't occur nearly as often as people assume.
I always said I don't want to pimp out the show. I don't want people to be watching it and and get cynical about why things are there.
I don't think product placement ruins your artistic integrity so long as you still have an insightful point to articulate about the product or culture at hand. Stranger Things, especially in season 3, had a great opportunity to focus on the inverse of something like Mad Men, depicting the effects of consumerism on the consumers and those who grew up during the Big Bang of privatization and neoliberalism. Sadly, it comes across as the reductionist parody of Stranger Things. Hey, remember this? So do we. Anyway, on with the show.
The original is the classic, no question about it. But the remake, sweeter, bolder, better.
All right, let's write this letter here. Dear Diet Coke, thank you for the millions of dollars.
Like, obviously this is played for comedy, but the lack of substance behind featuring the product, coupled with the new Coke Stranger Things limited release tie-in, really does make it feel quite sleazy. And not to sound like a broken record, but this wouldn't feel as confusing or disappointing if we hadn't been teased by the promise of deeper introspection. Is this simply an alternate reality where the megacorp is thwarted and Hawkins begins to thrive again once upon a time in Hollywood revisionist style? Season 3 embodies the messy politics of Stranger Things at its most inconsistent. Dumb fun that is definitely more focused on vibes and nostalgia than any sort of serious reflection. But as a result, whenever it does stray into an attempted commentary on the time and culture, it falls flat, mostly because of what the show has come to represent and be. If I were to fully engage with the cynical part of my brain, I would say that its vagaries and refusal to critically engage with 80s culture retrospectively is quite telling when it comes to the series as a whole. A show that is constantly looking to the past, repeating its greatest hits in season 2 and then bringing Hopper back from the dead in season 4, a fear of embracing change. Although I love season 4, Hopper's death was perfect, a way to force both the characters and the audience into growing and changing whilst still reminding us of how and why we got here. Hopper's passing is fertile ground for change, marked by the climax of season 4 as the Upside Down tears its way through Hawkins and does real, seemingly irreversible damage. Hopper's presence in the final scene only serves to mute the impending threat and shift in the world status quo. Imagine if it was revealed that Dumbledore had survived at the end of The Half-Blood Prince. The stakes wouldn't seem quite so dramatic. Even though the majority of the characters are not aware of the fact that he is alive until the very end of the season, it feels like a comfort blanket for the viewers. Don't worry, he's still here, nothing has really changed. I don't see what Hopper surviving adds to the material other than out-of-text continuity for the franchise. But, look, he's fighting monsters again, but this time it's in a Russian death camp? Pretty cool, eh? Listen, Stranger Things is a great show with fun stories and really lovable characters. Its impact and popularity is undeniable. But I think the refusal to properly reflect when paying lip service to cultural touchstones of the time and the status quo hardly changing over its 4-season run only acts in detriment to itself. It's frustrating to see brief glimmers where it has the potential to do more, say more, but willingly flounders in favour of ignorance and easy binging. But you know what? I love this scene and nothing will change my mind. This is a good show, dumb fun, whatever. Bye! Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please do consider subscribing, giving the video a like. Also, check out my Letterboxd account in the description, also links on my channel. Okay, bye.